Hello, everyone. My name is Will, and this is Will's Thrills, the podcast that brings horror and animation to your headsets. And welcome officially to episode 1 of What Are We Watching? Today, we'll be talking about the 2014 horror thriller It Follows, written by Mr. David Robert Mitchell. So, just to get us started, I'm going to give like a brief spoiler-free synopsis, just so you guys can kind of get like a feel of what we're going to talk about. Let's see. I want to make this as spoiler free as possible because there's a big part of the story that I kind of don't want to spoil. So I'll just say this. Jamie, your average teenage girl, after a date with her boyfriend, finds that an entity is following her. And as it nears closer, she fears for her life. And though her friends don't believe her at first, they'll find out more than ever that not only is she not lying, but the danger is realer than ever. Did y'all like that? I came up with that on the spot. So, let's get started. So, for those of you who don't know how this is going to go, after the synopsis, I'm going to give a rundown of the movie scene by scene, give you guys a few little tidbits, and some things that I may have noticed. And then after that, I'm going to rate it. So, without further ado, this is It Follows. So, the first scene opens with a clear road in a neighborhood, and a girl is seen running out of her house. Now, what immediately caught my eye when I saw this is that one, the outfit she's wearing is kind of strange. She's kind of wearing like, it's almost like she's wearing like sleep clothes, but she's wearing like red heels and like red lipstick. So it almost looked like she just came in from somewhere, or maybe she's been in the house waiting. It's not really unsure, but what really matters is she runs out of her house. And then she kind of like looks around, and she's clearly like afraid. She's clearly being chased. Something is clearly chasing her, but we as the audience have like no idea what's going on. So as she's looking around, kind of standing in the middle of the street, her neighbor like asks her like, "Hey, are you okay?" And she's like, I'm fine. And then her dad says, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" And then all of a sudden, she runs back in the house, kind of like before her father can even really catch her, grabs her car keys, and drives off. Now, no, I'm immediately like, red flag, oh God, what's happening? Because she's on a run. So whatever's chasing her is either fast or she feels like she got to get away quick. Because the way she got in that car, if you would have saw how fast she ran in that car and pulled off, you would have thought somebody was coming to get her. Alright, so what happens next? So basically, after she drives for some time, she ends up at a beach. Now, by this point, she's pretty much been driving all day. It's probably like midday when she pulls off initially, and by the time she gets to the beach, it's dark. So she's at least been driving for a couple hours, right? And in this moment, she pretty much just sits at the beach and calls her parents and says goodbye. And she's like crying, and she's like, "I'm so sorry for everything I've ever done to you guys. Like, I'm sorry I couldn't have been a better daughter." And then right as she's like crying, the camera pans away. And we kind of get like a POV shot of what she sees, but we see nothing. So like literally imagine this. Imagine you're looking forward, and there's a parked car with the headlights on. And then it's just open road. And you don't see anything. We don't see anything. But she's clearly getting more and more panicked. And then next thing you know, the next shot is it's daytime and she's dead. Now note, when it cuts back to her being daytime, her death is kind of gruesome. So just, warning. She's seen dead, and like, I don't know exactly how they did this, but she's laying on her front. But her leg has been bent back and snapped. So you literally like see the bone coming out, and like it's kind of limp, and she's kind of gray. So like she's been dead for a little bit by the time we see her, because she's like completely lifeless. So that's all we ever see of her. So then we meet up with her main character. Her name is Jamie. She also goes by Jay. I'm going to be calling her Jamie just because I like the way that sounds better. So I'm going to call her Jamie. So when we first meet Jamie, she's just kind of hanging out in the pool, swimming around. And her sister, whose name is Kelly, walks up to her and they're talking, and Jamie talks about how she's gonna meet with her boyfriend. Now, no, they haven't been going out for long. They've just been kind of going out on a few dates, but she talks about how they're gonna officially like go out on like a real date this time. So after she gets out the pool, she's just kind of hanging around with some friends for a little bit. And while she's in the pool, she doesn't notice this, but there's two boys looking at her. So they never really specify who these boys are, but they're kind of like watching her the whole time, which is weird. But basically, these two boys are like looking at her while she's like in the pool. So like being perverts, as you could probably guess. Like I said, she was talking to her friends. And I noticed that when she was talking with her friends, so it's Jamie, her sister Kelly, and then two friends who we later find out their names are Yara and Paul. And I immediately noticed that, at least in the beginning, their chemistry wasn't really there. Like, they seemed kind of awkward. So, to me, it kind of seemed like Kelly, Yara, and Paul were really close. And Jamie seemed like she might be older than them, at least a little bit. So it kind of seemed like there was a little bit of detachment there, at least when I first watched it. And so after they kind of talk for a little bit, she starts getting ready for her date, and her date go to the movies together. And while they're waiting in line for the movies, they'll play this game called the trading game. And basically what it is one person decides who they want to trade places with, and the other person has to guess who they wanted to trade places with and why, right? When the boyfriend plays, so we don't get his name, we find out his name later, is Hugh. So for purposes, I'm going to call him Hugh for now. Hugh basically says that he will want to trade places with this little boy that he saw because he says, and I quote, "Imagine how good it would be to have your whole life ahead of you." Now, note, this is kind of foreshadowing. Now, you guys don't know what's happening, so I do. So I'm going to tell you this now. This is foreshadowing. Keep that in your mind that he says that. So once they actually sit down at the movie theater, and no, this is like a really weird looking movie theater. There's like a bunch of like Asian art on the walls, and there's like a full piano at the front. And like, instead of it being like a normal movie theater, it almost looks like a play type theater. But they're clearly like not going to see a play. Like, it's clearly like they're supposed to be there for a movie. There's a lot of like weird stuff like that in this movie. I'll talk about it more later on. So, like I said, they were playing the trading game. And the boyfriend says, oh, just also to mention this, the boyfriend's kind of like, has kind of like a jokey, kind of pessimistic attitude. He kind of has an attitude like you're a generic kind of cool guy. Like, he's very like, yeah, sup, like, I don't really care, kind of. That's kind of his vibe. But he's kind of like wholesome too. So he's not like a complete asshole, but he's also not like, I'm in love with you. That's kind of his vibe. Okay, so back to the main story. So Hugh basically says, oh, you want to trade places with the girl in the yellow dress. And he kind of points behind her. And so Jamie looks and doesn't see anyone. And so Hugh looks back and says, her right there. You don't see her? And Jamie's like, are you joking? And so in that moment, he immediately gets scared. Now, this is when I start raising red flags, because I'm like, okay, he's seeing people that aren't there. What's going on? So he immediately was like, we need to go. I feel sick. Like, I don't feel okay. Like, I want to go. Like, I want to leave. I need air. Now, keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind. Because that sense of urgency is I'm gonna rope it back in towards the end. You'll see what I mean. Just keep in mind that when he sees the girl in the yellow dress, he immediately like gets up and starts acting completely weird. After this moment, he changes. So beware. So, he sees the girl in the yellow dress, right? And so after that, they go to dinner, right? When they're at dinner, okay, so let me kind of explain how this is shot. So you know how in restaurants, they'll usually kind of have like a booth type situation that's like near a window. Like literally you'll be kind of like on the window. And one person will sit on one side and person will sit on the other side, and there's a table between. So we're shot at an angle in which we can see them both, like sitting like near the window. And so what happens is the camera kind of pans or focuses onto the middle, and you see a figure, and to me it looked like an old woman. You see them walking towards them. And they make it clear so that you notice, but the main characters, but Jamie and Hugh, don't notice. But we as the audience notice this figure just walking in a straight line. And that's what I think is really creepy about this, because, like, kind of spoiler ahead, but the creature never runs, it never crawls, it never does anything like that. It only walks. So, this will come up later. So, after they finish dinner, the next day, Jamie meets up with her sister Kelly, and they're just walking, and they're just talking about what happened last night. Jamie tells Kelly, like, he was acting kind of weird, and Kelly kind of brings up the fact that Jamie and Hugh haven't had sex yet. And Jamie just is kind of like, yeah, like, I know he wants to, but I just, I don't know. We'll see if it happens. If it happens, cool. So they do that, and then they have another date. And at this point, Hugh was acting completely different. He's being kind of, I don't want to say forceful, but he's being kind of fast. He's like, he takes her to the beach, he has beers, and as soon as they sit down at the beach, he starts kissing her. Now, we know where this is going. So what happens is Jamie and Hugh go back to Hugh's car, and they have sex in the car, right? And so after they have sex, Jamie's kind of like leaning out the window, has her arm out the car door, like she's chilling. She's like playing with the flowers on the ground. She's talking about, how she always dreamed about having a boyfriend and doing things like this and being able to be with somebody who actually cared about her. And as she's talking about this, you see Hugh kind of go to his trunk, get something out of his trunk, right? And so the way she's laying stomach first, like in the back seat. So she's laying like the long way in the back seat, and she's laying with like her top half kind of out the car. And so he gets behind her, and at first he's like kissing her on her neck, being real sensual, and then he takes a rag and puts it over her mouth. And I want to say this scene was like kind of gruesome in a way that it lasts for so long, and Jamie's like sobbing. And I don't know, the way that she cries is like it's almost like a cry of disappointment. It's like a cry of disbelief, like betrayal. Like, I feel like you can feel her being crushed by what's happening, right? So she eventually passes out, and when she wakes up, she's strapped to a wheelchair in like an abandoned building. I can't really tell you what it is. It looked like it may have been like some sort of like old rundown apartment building. I don't know. But basically, I'm explaining like this. It's so beat up to the point where literally whole walls are missing. So you can be inside the building and see straight outside. So she's strapped to a wheelchair, right? And so she kind of wakes up, and Hugh is like profusely apologizing to her. He's like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not going to hurt you. Like, I'm not going to do anything to her. Then he goes on to say that something is going to follow her. He doesn't say what, and I partially think that's because he doesn't really know what either, but he says something's going to follow her. And somebody gave it to him, and he passed it on to her. Which, basically, if you haven't guessed it already, whatever this creature is passed on through sex. So yes, we have a demon STD on the market. Demon STD. Red alert, red alert. So, after he says that he passed it on to her, he basically tells her that it could look like someone she knows or a stranger in a crowd. And he also says something that, strangely enough, I kind of wish they would have used it more. But he says, like, sometimes he feels like it disguises itself as someone you know, because it'll hurt more. And this only really happens like one time in the movie, and I'll get to that later. But I feel like they could have utilized that more, because I feel like that'd be like a really like disturbing thing to add. Like, oh my god, this looks like my mother. Oh my god, mom, no. But like they didn't really do that much. But it's okay. It doesn't really detract from the movie much. So yeah, he basically says that it could look like someone she knows or a stranger in a crowd. And she basically says that it look like anyone. And then Jamie says that it was her first time, that like she can't believe that he would do this to her, and she's kind of like in shock, and like she's kind of like screaming, and like it's such a sense of betrayal. Like, I know I've said that before, but it's kind of hard to explain. Like, it almost feels like she's dealt with not something similar, but it almost feels like a familiar pain. It's kind of hard to explain, but like it feels like she's been through some sort of hurt before, and this is rehashing that pain. That's what it feels like to me. So basically what happens after that is Jay kind of pushes her towards like the edge, like almost like he's going to push her off. But really, it's just so she can see what literally looks to be like a naked woman. Now, no, she doesn't know this woman. She literally says, like, who is that? So after that, Hugh basically tells her that the only way to get rid of it is to sleep with someone else. Now, how would you go about this? Because I feel like this is a moral dilemma. Because not only does she have to sleep with someone else to get rid of it, if it kills her, it'll go after Hugh. Which means whoever she gives it to, if it kills them, it'll go back to her. Now we have a dilemma. Because that means not only are you putting somebody's life at risk, but now you're in a situation where she'll never be safe. Like, she'll never be able to feel 100% at comfort, because she knows at the end of the day, there may come a day where, even if she does decide to pass it on, there may come a day where it'll come back for her. And she'll just kind of have to live with that. And I think that was a really good detail to add, because it could have just been a thing where it was like, oh, well, it's sexually transmitted, so if it kills you, it's gone. They could have done that. But the fact that they decided to be like, if you give it to someone else and they die, it comes back to you, makes this like a lifelong thing. She's going to struggle with this forever. She's not really thinking that far at this time. She's still kind of in a disbelief, but you'll see what I mean in a second. So, after she sees the naked woman and, he tells her that the only way to get rid of it is to sleep with someone else. And if it kills her, it'll go for him. All right, cool. So, he basically tells her to never go anywhere with only one exit, and that even though it's slow, it's not dumb. Keep this in mind. Even though it's slow, it's not dumb. This is going to come back towards the end, because you're going to remember that, because they're going to try something and it's not going to work out. So, he then helps her escape, because remember, if it kills her, it goes after him. So, he's trying to keep her alive. So he helps her escape, and he pretty much throws her in the car, is taking her back home. So while that's happening, we pan to a scene with Yara, Paul, and Kelly. Kelly makes a comment that kind of goes back to the beginning of the movie, where she basically says, like, if someone knows that death is imminent, they'll kind of just sit and accept it. And that's a lot like what the girl did in the beginning, where she kind of just sat at the beach and accepted her fate and was kind of like, it is what it is. Like, she didn't want to run anymore. So after that, after we get that little tidbit from Yara, Hugh literally, like, throws Jamie out of his car. And note, Jamie's in, like, a bra and panties. So, like, as you can imagine, it looks like he may have raped her and then just left her in front of her house. So, after that happens, They basically call the police, which of course, and she admits the police. She admits to the police that one, the sex they had was consensual, so that he indeed did not rape her, and two, though she's been outside of his house, she's never been in it, which is strange, right? So, and after that scene, we pretty much find out that Hugh, I'm using air quotes right now, Hugh created a fake name to rent a house in the city. So, we now know that Hugh is not Hugh. That's not his name. Who knows where he got it from? I don't know. But that's not his real name. And he used it to rent a home in the city. Now, this rings an alarm to me because, like he said, someone passed it on to him and then he passed it on to her. Which could likely mean that he came to this town to try and escape whatever this monster was. Which very well could be the case. That's at least what's going on in my mind. Leave your comments down below what you think it might be. Okay. So, after it's revealed that Hugh's not Hugh, after that, you see Jamie just kind of like looking at herself in the mirror. And I noticed that she looks very disgusted with herself. Like, genuinely. Like, it's almost like a disdain for herself. And I know that, especially when it comes to like sexually transmitted diseases, it has such a stigma because, you know, and it's easy to say, and it's true, that when people have STDs, a lot of times society will perceive them as dirty or nasty or like a hoe or like they sleep with multiple people. When 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. You don't have to sleep with multiple people to get an STD. It takes one time. Once. And then boom, you have it. And that says nothing on your cleanliness or who you are as a person. However, society, specifically with women, I may add, has a tendency to deem people who have these things as whores or nasty or unclean. And I think they were kind of depicting that in this scene where they were kind of showing that she now feels disgusted with herself because of what happened. Like, there's literally a scene where she like looks at her vagina and starts like hyperventilating. And I think it's because now it's put like, it's almost like traumatic for her. And I'm sure it was, because something like this would be traumatic for anyone. But to see her literally look at herself in that way is just, it kind of was heart-wrenching to see, honestly. And she's such a pretty girl. The actress who plays her, let me see what her name is. Give me 1 second. I believe it's Micah Monroe. She's a very pretty girl, and even in the movie, they talk about how pretty she is and how she's popular. So to see her kind of look at herself with that sense of disgust was just kind of hard to see. But not only that, we noticed that the neighbor boys that were staring at her in the pool is also watching her at her window, which is a whole nother disgusting thing. And it's kind of weird that they added that, because that doesn't really end up adding to anything. It doesn't really come back. They're just kind of there watching her. And I guess I feel like that can kind of add to like the over sexualization of her in general. And that's going to come into play later too with a certain character who I have beef with, but we'll talk about Mr. So-and-so later. So, after that scene, Jamie is seen sitting in class. It looks like a college classroom, like she could be like a college student. So she's sitting in class, and while she's looking out the window, she notices an old woman in what looks like a medical gown walking towards her. Like, so imagine you're looking out the window and like you see a woman walking just in a straight line. And she's not like turning, she's not blinking, nothing. She's just walking in a straight line. And she immediately, like anyone, because her fight or flight hits immediately, she gets up and she leaves the classroom. And not to mention when the woman's walking in, it's kind of juxtaposed with her teacher reading something. I should have did research to see what she was reading, but she was kind of reading something involving death, and it was the way they like juxtaposed them together was almost as if they were relating to one another. Leave it down in the comments below if you know what that story is or if you know how it relates to the story. Just leave it in the comments below. But after she notices the woman, she immediately gets up. And when Jamie leaves the classroom, the woman suddenly appears behind her in the hallway. And when she sees the woman, she immediately says, like, hello, like trying to see like if the woman will respond. And she notices that the two girls in the hallway that are in the hallway with her say, yeah, like, what's up? So immediately this clicks to her. Oh my God, they can't see her. Now, this is where the trouble comes in for me. Because now we're in a situation where not only am I in danger, I'm in danger that only I can see. So immediately the I'm crazy narrative is what I'm fearing. Because how do you prove that something's after you that's literally invisible? You let me know, because I don't know. So after that happens, she like pretty much runs home, because who wouldn't? And she runs to her sister and her friend, and they work at like an ice cream shop. And she tells them what happened at the school. Kelly decides to have Yara and Paul, their other two friends, stay the night with them. And this is kind of where you get hints that Paul, their male friend, has like a thing for Jamie, but not, I like how they write this because it almost feels perverted, the feelings he has for her, because they're clearly like unrequited. Like she doesn't feel anything for him, and that's clear. But the way he like his demeanor around her is like strange. And we'll get into that more later, like after I finish the story. My little tidbits of things I noticed, we'll talk about that later. Like I said, Yara and Paul decide to stay the night. Just in case like anything happens. And Jamie basically walks out into the living room where Paul is and tells him that like she can't sleep in her room, like she doesn't feel comfortable there by herself. So she sits on the couch with Paul, and they're just kind of talking. And I noticed that Paul kind of started flirting with her, which is where I'm saying like the perverted thing is coming in. Like, you know, Jamie just went through like some sexual trauma. Why would you then try to flirt with her? Like it's like he's clearly like flirting with her, but in my head I'm just like, why would you flirt with someone who clearly just went through some sort of trauma involving a relationship? I just feel like the timing was weird, which is why I don't really care for Paul. He's Mr. So-and-so I don't really care for. I like him as a character because I get why he's there, especially for like the end game, but this whole scenario of him like flirting with her this whole time is really weird to me. So they're talking about like past experiences and stuff like that. And while Paul and Jay are talking, Jay is Jamie, they hear some glass shatter. And so Paul immediately gets up to check, and nothing's there. So he decides to go wake up Kelly and Yara. Now, here's my issue. Jamie decides to stay behind on the couch while Paul went to go check the glass, and when Paul went to go wake up Kelly and Yara. Now, my thinking is, there's a creature following me, right? And at this point, as far as she knows, no one else can see it. Why would you be anywhere at any point in time by yourself? In my opinion, if I knew the kind of situation I was in, and this is still early on in the movie, so maybe she doesn't completely get her circumstances, but either way, my first initial thought is, I'm going to be with somebody at all times, so that if I have to get away quick, I can. But I don't want to be in a situation where I'm by myself or unsupervised, and then something happens, and can't nobody get to me quick enough. So after Paul goes to get Yara and Kelly, Jamie starts like walking around the house. I don't know why she does this, but she does. And she sees a girl in the kitchen, and the girl literally starts peeing on herself and walking towards her. And this is when I noticed the girl looked like she had been beaten, and like she had like one of her breasts were out, and she looked like she had been beaten. So my immediate thought was like, maybe she was sexually assaulted. I'm not really sure. I don't really want to jump to conclusions regarding that because that's a really serious topic. But honestly, that's what it looked like to me. And so I just wanted to point that out because that's just kind of what it looked like. So after she sees this, like, of course, she like screams and runs up the stairs. And she runs into her room, shuts and locks the door. And she just kind of sits at the back of her room. Now, if this was me, I would have ran outside where there's open space. I'm not going to run into my room where I'm in a corner. Well, if they come in there, I'm done for. I'm not going to do that. But she's not me, so she wasn't thinking on her feet. So she runs into her room, shuts the door, locks it, and just sits. And she's sitting in there crying, right? And so after that, Kelly comes on the door and tells her to open it. And eventually she does. Now note, if this was me, and if I made the dumb decision to lock myself in a room, I would not be opening doors for anyone, but she did. So she opens the door for Kelly. She then hears another knock on the door, and it's Yara. And when they open the door, Yara walks in, and literally, because the way the hallway is lit to her bedroom, it's like there's no light in the hallway, and it's just the light in her room. So the hallway is like completely dark until you step into her room. So when Yara walks in, you literally see this 7-foot dude, and it looks like he didn't have any eyes. I wasn't too sure, but something was going on with his eyes. And this 7-foot man bends down and walks into her room behind Yara. Now, this is one of the scariest scenes of the whole movie to me, because you literally do not see him until he's already in there. And it's too late. So after he walks in, Jay literally jumps out the window. Like, I thought this scene was so funny, because the way she got out of there, she was not playing no games. She hops out her window, like does a full like land, like Spider-Man land, gets on her bike and gets to pedaling. Now I know that's right. She got out of there. She was not playing no games. She said, "Not today. You're not getting me today." So she's just riding her bike, and she rides it all the way to the park, right? And she just kind of sits on the swings. And I think that she's kind of sitting on the swings kind of nonchalantly. And I think, because right after that, her friends find her. I think if the creature had caught her, she would have just let it get her. I think she had kind of given up. But like, because her friends found her, she kind of like was like, okay, I can do this. So her friends find her at the park, right? And so then Greg, which is our first time seeing him, Greg was also originally part of their friend group, but I'm assuming he kind of like split apart from them after they got kind of older. So Greg, one of their old friends, also meets up with them because I guess he sees her running out and then get on her bike and leave. So he immediately goes like to see what's up with her, and he has a car. He's the only one that drives. So he gets in the car, meets up with her there as well with her friends, and pretty much they all pack in his car and they go to Hugh's house. I know, crazy, right? Going to the guy who gave you a curse's house, whatever. But they kind of went there with the intention of finding him, or at least they tried. Now, of course, they didn't find him. But what they did find was an old, rickety, boarded up house. And it looked like it had sound alarms. So he had like makeshift sound alarms. So he had like tin cans strung up on string, like by the windows and stuff. So I'm assuming if anything came in through the windows, he would know before they officially got in, which, good idea, good survival tactic. But if I saw that in this situation, I would immediately be terrified, because that means that this man was like in a situation. So as we already know, Hugh's not his real name. So be ready for that, because we're about to start digging into Hugh. So, after they find, like, the makeshift sound alerts, they also see, like, a bunch of medication everywhere. Then they find out that Hugh went somewhere called Lawson High School, which I'm assuming must be fairly close, because they immediately drive there. So I guess it's, like, kind of close to them, I guess. So they go to Lawson High School, and we don't really notice it because it's so well disguised. I love how they do this. But the creature is there, disguised as a student. But the characters literally never notice. They never notice that this creature is there. And honestly, we wouldn't notice it either. But I did because, for this, I was paying extra attention. So you see this person disguised as a student, and it's just walking in a straight line. And you can always tell because it'll just be walking in a line where there's nothing there. So, like, normally if you see a person, they'll be, like, walking on a path or something. But they'll be, like, walking towards, like, a window. Like, somewhere where there's nowhere for them to go. So, there's a student disguised. The creature is disguised as a student. But they don't notice it, as I said before. So, they go to the principal and show them a picture of Hugh. And the principal tells them that Hugh's real name is Jeff Redmond. Okay, so, for future references, I will now be calling Hugh Jeff. So remember, Hugh is Jeff. Jeff is Hugh. They're the same person. So, from now on, I will be referring to Hugh as Jeff, because that's his real name. Okay, so, they find out his name is Jeff Redmond. So, the creature can also be seen. So when they all get into the car and they're pulling off, you literally see the creature walking towards their car. But they don't notice it because, once again, it's disguised as a student. So, after that, they go to Jeff Redmond's house. So they go to his actual mom's house. And basically they get Jeff out. He sits down with them. They have, like, drinks and stuff, which is weird because, like, there's nothing casual about what's happening, but whatever. So, he tells her, although it's after her, he can still see it. Which is why, when they were in the abandoned building, he was able to push her in the direction of seeing the creature. Because he can see it too. He also says that, well, first of all, you see somebody walking in the background. And so I'm immediately thinking, like, oh God, it's the creature. But it's not. It's just like a girl. She's just playing with a soccer ball. But Jamie basically says she doesn't know whether she wants to pass it on or not. And so also, I'll say this too. Jeff goes on to say that he got it from a girl at a bar. And he didn't even know her name. Now, here's my theory. And they never really say this explicitly, but I think this is what it is. I think the girl in the beginning was somebody that Jeff slept with. And the reason why I say that is because, remember when I said his urgency when the girl in the yellow dress came up would come back again? This is where it's coming back. So the reason I think he slept with the girl in the beginning and then she died and it went back to him. And the reason why I said that is because when he saw the girl in the yellow dress, he genuinely seemed uneasy. He seemed surprised that it was there. Now, you could also say maybe it's because he thought he got far enough away from it to believe that. But I think what happened is the girl died. And he didn't realize the girl died until he saw the creature again. And so he must have found out the girl died after the fact. And that's when he decided he wanted to sleep with Jamie. That's my thought. Now, it could be different. I don't know. but that's what it's telling me right now. Leave a comment down below if you think that it may be something different or if you agree with me. So, after that moment, like I said before, Jamie basically says that she doesn't know whether she wants to pass it on or not. And the group decide that they're going to go down to a beach house. And Jamie kind of starts making those makeshift alarms like Jeff did. Because they seem to work. Or at least they kept him alive long enough. So she's, thinking, it couldn't hurt. So after that, we see Greg getting a gun. So we're immediately like, okay, what's going on, Greg? What are you doing? But what he ends up doing is trying to teach Jamie how to shoot. So I guess his thought process was, because in this moment, he doesn't all the way know what's happening. Like, Jamie kind of told him, but he don't believe her. Because, in all honesty, like, who would? If somebody told me, like, hey, there's this thing following me, but, like, nobody can see it, and it's going to kill me, and I got it because I had sex with my boyfriend, I don't know if my immediate thing would be like, oh my God, I believe you, run. Like, I don't think that'd be me either. So, Greg started teaching her how to shoot, because in my thought process, he must think this is like a human, right? And so after that, they're all kind of sitting at the beach, and we can see a girl walking towards them in the background, and it clearly looks like Yara. So my initial thinking was like, oh, Yara must have come back from like using the bathroom or something. And then the camera pans to Yara in the pool. Not the pool, to Yara in the ocean. In like a floaty. And when I see that, I immediately start panicking. Because I'm like, oh no, that's not Yara. So I'm immediately like, oh my God, it's getting closer, it's getting closer. And they're not noticing because Jamie has her back towards the way the creature's walking. So she can't see it coming. And her friends can't see it because, they can't see the creature at all. So the creature walks towards her and literally pulls her hair, and her friends see her hair floating in the air. So now they're scared, because now they're like, oh God, this is happening for real. So now they're scared. So the creature gets up and starts pulling Jamie by the hair. And then Jamie kind of gets herself loose because Paul like kind of tries to like push the creature and then like shoves him off. And so they all like are running. And so Jamie gets the gun and starts shooting at it and shoots it and actually hits it in the neck. But of course, in, supernatural fashion, this thing ain't human. So it immediately gets up. But what's weird is it bleeds. I think that's a weird thing that they added. Like, for like an effect purpose, like it's like a visceral effect, so I think it's cool. I just think it's kind of weird that it bleeds even though it doesn't die. It's kind of weird, but whatever. But she shoots it in the neck and then like kind of falls out like it's dead, and then immediately gets back up. And so we're like, oh God, that's it. She gone for. That's it. So after that, they lock the door, and now they're in like a shed area. This is where Greg got the gun from. So they're inside like the shed area, and Jamie kind of locks the door, and the creature literally starts banging the door down and kicks a hole through the bottom of the door. And so, no, Greg sees none of this, because while all this is happening, Greg is peeing. So he can't see any of this is happening. So to him, he literally just sees the girls and Paul running into the shed, Jamie shooting at nothing, and then a hole appearing at the bottom of the shed door. He sees nothing. He didn't see the thing with the hair. He didn't see the marks on Paul. He didn't see none of that. So he peeks in, is like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, why are you, what's going on? And he ducks back out the way, and the creature crawls in. And so Jamie, this is why I really fool with Jamie. Jamie got out of there. Her fight or flight response is sick, because she got out of there. She got out that there's a side door in the shed. She pulled that joint open. She ran out, took Greg's keys, and stole the car without her friends, just left her friends there and drove off with the car. And she ends up kind of like crashing the car because she's like so flustered. She just kind of ends up crashing the car. And so after that, she wakes up in the hospital, and this time she has a broken arm, and everyone's around her, her family and stuff, and she's hearing footsteps, and she gets nervous and like literally starts tearing up. But ends up just being a nurse. And so in that moment, she decides that she is going to pass it on to Greg. And her and Greg in the next shot is her and him having sex. Now note, Greg has heard Jamie's version of the story. He knows what Jamie believes, but he does not believe a word of anything Jamie's saying. Which then brings up the thing, well, then why did she choose to sleep with him? This I'll bring up later, because I have a couple ideas about this, because this also has to do with Paul. So, the next scene, like I said, shows her and Greg having sex. No, while she's in the hospital. So she's literally in a hospital bed, in a hospital gown, broken arm, got her head kind of wrapped up, and he's having sex with her in the hospital bed. And I'm like, 1, you're nasty, and 2, you're nasty. Like, come on now. Come on. Really? In the hospital bed? So after it's there, Greg is seen kind of talking to other girls. Like, he's hanging out with a bunch of other girls. And basically he tells Jamie that he hasn't seen anything, even though it's been like 3 days. So in 3 days' time, he hasn't seen anything. So further, suspending his belief of Jamie, he's pretty much at the point where he's like, you crazy at this point. And so, like I said, Greg just, doesn't believe any of it. And Jamie is now like watching Greg's house at night. She's back home and she's watching his house. And she sees the creature break into his house. Now, it's disguised as a random man that she doesn't know. And she literally sees it throw a rock through and climb in through the window. So her immediate instinct is to run over there. Now, me, I don't know if I would have did that. I don't know. Because, like, what if I'm face to face with the thing and it's like, I remember you, and this snatches me up. I don't know. I wouldn't have made that decision, but this ain't me. So, she runs out there to Greg's house trying to save him. Then, once Jamie gets inside, she sees the creature disguised as Greg's mom banging on the door. And she's literally screaming, Greg, don't open the door, Greg. And the whole time she's in the house, she's screaming, Greg, don't open the door. Greg, it's in the house. Greg, oh, don't open the door, Greg. The whole time. Now, note, Greg's dumb self hears the banging, opens the door, and it's like, Mom, what the heck? And then the creature literally like jumps on him and like sucks the life out of him, and then he's dead. Now, here's my thing with this, and this is another topic that I want to kind of get into. I noticed that the creature seemed to be more violent with the women in this situation. Now, no, we've only really seen 2 victims die so far, and we've really only seen Jamie get attacked, and we don't know how she would have died. But I'm just gonna say this, as far as we know, the creature has been physically violent with the women, while as with Greg, she literally just like sucked the soul out of him. Like, literally she jumps on him, like gyrates on top of him, and then he's dead. And then that's just it. And I'm like, but like literally in a later scene, the creature's like throwing TVs at Jamie. Like, it's crazy. So like, I think this is also kind of a play on the difference in the stigma of STDs between men and women, and how it's seen as way more negative with women, whereas with men it's like honestly kind of non-existent. Like the the stigma of STDs for men is, I mean, of course it exists, but on a way less significant scale than for women. And I think that's kind of what this is saying. Or at least that's what I took from it, in my opinion. So, like I said, Greg is now dead. So after Greg dies, she pretty much like drives away sobbing. And she kind of parks in the middle of a trail and gets on the hood of her car and falls asleep. Then when she wakes up, she kind of walks for a while and she finds a beach. And on the beach, she sees a boat with some guys on it. And then she walks into the water. And I think in that scene, we were meant to believe that she maybe was going to try to have sex with one of the men on the boat. And we later find out that she decides not to do that. At least we think so. Because, I mean, it ends up coming right back after her. So either she did it and it ended up killing whoever she did it with and then went back to her, or she didn't do it or like she morally like couldn't do it. One of the two. I personally believe that she didn't do it, just based off the fact that she like immediately was like, you know, it's still after me, and she was sad and she was talking about passing it on. So I'm gonna say she didn't, because I just feel like that's what makes more sense for her character. But the next scene, after she, you know, comes out the water, no, now she's in the car soaking wet. She's in her room. And Paul comes over. And Paul basically volunteers to have it passed on to him. This is officially where my issues with Paul reached a head. Paul then tries to lean in and kiss her. Yes, you heard me right. Paul then leans in and tries to kiss her, where Jamie then rejects him. Here's my issue with this and with Paul. Paul is opportunistic. And the fact that he used this, and I think it's because they kind of explain very early on that he's always had like a crush on her. The fact that he uses this moment to try and have sex with her, because you kind of get the notion that he's not really doing this to help her. He's doing this because he wants to have sex with her. And that's what makes it so nasty, because nothing he says out his mouth ever feels genuine. Like nothing. Everything he does seems to be with the end goal of him either being with Jamie or having sex with Jamie. And I don't like that, because it's clearly unrequited. Jamie has no feelings towards him. And it's very clear. Throughout this whole movie, she shows no feelings towards him. And yet, he is almost forcing this like forced affection on her. And it's really apparent. And it's honestly kind of gross. But after that scene where he once again tries to kiss her, she rejects him. And in this scene, she says something along the lines of like, well, not her. Paul kind of says something along the lines of, hey, I liked you too. What made you choose Greg? And she says something along the lines of, Greg didn't seem afraid. And initially this would be like a very normal response. I kind of be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like she felt like he wasn't going to be scared if it like attacked him or whatever. But I think it was more so she knew he didn't believe her. One. Or two, she thought that he was going to have sex with somebody else quickly. And the reason why she didn't pick Paul was because she knew that Paul wouldn't have the guts to sleep with somebody else after her, because he wanted to sleep with her so bad. That's genuinely what I think. And that's just how I feel about it. Now, I could be wrong. Leave your comments down below of the reason that you think Jamie chose not to have sex with Paul initially. But that's just my 2 cents on it. So after she kind of rejects Paul, they all pack up in the car and they go to the pool. At the pool, they kind of set up like this plan. Now, actually, no. Before they get to the pool, as they're driving off, Jamie sees a naked man standing on the top of her roof, like fully naked. I think he has like a little like cloth covering like his bits, but like that man is naked. Like his butt is completely out. So, like I said before, they make their way to the pool. They pretty much kind of set up this plan where they're gonna like, I guess, try to electrocute it. I don't know. The way they set this plan up, I don't think they thought this all the way through. But their initial goal was to use Jamie as bait. And they were gonna have the creature get in the pool, or like they thought the creature would get in the pool, and then they would throw the electrical appliance in, have Jamie get out, and electrocute it. Now remember what Jeff said. It's slow, but it ain't dumb. It's slow, but it ain't dumb. So, once they plug up all the like appliances and stuff, Jamie gets in the pool and she announces the creature just walked in. Now, no, we see it from Yara, Paul, and Kelly's point of view. So we can't see it. We don't see the creature. All we see is Jamie, and they're like, oh my God, point it out. Where is it? Point at it. And she points at it, and they ask, who is it? And she says, I don't want to tell you. Now, I don't know what that means, because I know that it takes the shape of people. So I'm assuming that maybe it may have took the form of maybe like one of her family members, maybe. I don't really know, but I just kind of want to throw in that she said that line, because I think it's kind of curious that she said like, I don't want to tell you. Like it was so horrific that she couldn't say. I don't know. But or maybe it was like someone who was like really badly hurt. I don't know. But after that, she says it's like just staring at her. And the creature immediately starts throwing the electronics that they plugged up in the water, trying to electrocute her. Because like Jeff said, it's dumb, but it's not stupid. You're not going to be able to trick this thing. So, after that, Paul, not Jamie. Paul gets the gun and starts trying to shoot at it. Now, of course, he can't see it. So he's just going off of where Jamie is pointing. And also the creature is throwing things at Jamie. So she's also like ducking under the water. So he shoots and accidentally shoots Yara in the leg. Now she bleeding out. She hurt. So after that, Kelly runs up and throws a drape over the creature's head. And so now we can see the creature clear as day. And so Paul shoots the creature in the head, and it falls in the water. Now, because we know that this creature, can't die, Jamie tries to get out the water, and the creature grabs her leg, right? So at this point, Paul just got to start shooting at the water. So Paul's shooting in the water, trying to get it, and then Paul eventually hits it in the head, and it lets go of Jamie. And Jamie swims out of the pool. And she kind of goes to the edge of the pool once she gets out to check and see if it's still there. And the pool just fills with blood. But we know that's only what she sees. That's not what her friends see. Her friends just see clear water. And in that moment, in the next scene, we see her and Paul having sex. Now, if anybody else is as disappointed as I am, raise your hand. I did not want this. I didn't want to see this. But we got it. She ends up having sex with Paul. And I really think that this is like a really important scene because he says something that I think kind of adds something. He looks at Jamie after they have sex, and Paul says, "Do you feel any different?" And she says, "No." And she says, "Do you feel any different?" And he says, "No." There's a certain nuance to that scene because not only is she talking about, like, does he feel different in regards to, passing the curse on to him, but also, does he feel different now that they've had sex, the thing that he's always wanted? And he says no. And I think that's because he knows that it didn't mean anything. And this thing he was longing for, because it wasn't done for the right reasons, he ended up not feeling any different. He feels the same. And I really like that. And I'm going to kind of get into their relationship later. So after that, they visit Yara in the hospital, and Yara once again says something profound about death. I can't exactly remember right now. It wasn't as important, but she says something profound about death. And then at the end of the movie, Jamie and Paul are seen holding hands together as they're both being followed. And that is officially the end of It Follows. Now I'm going to give you guys a few tidbits that I noticed. And the main thing I'm going to talk about is Paul and Jamie's relationship. And the reason why I wanted to bring perspective on this is because there are small bits of it lingered throughout the movie, but it's never like a main thing. And that is because, like I said before, Jamie has no feelings towards Paul. And so at the end of the movie, where they presumably end up together, it feels almost tragic. Like, normally in these kinds of movies, like, we're supposed to be happy, like the couple we've been rooting for are finally together, but this was never the couple we were rooting for. There is no couple we're rooting for. They weren't supposed to be a couple. And when you see them holding hands together, it's not in a loving way. They're together out of necessity. They're close, but there's so much space between them. And it's so hard to watch because you kind of watch, especially since Paul's whole demeanor towards her kind of changes. And you can feel him being distant. And it's immediately so. Like, you can immediately tell, like, oh my gosh, he feels different about her after this. He doesn't feel the same way. That almost obsession he had with her is not the same. And you can tell because when they end up together, there's nothing. When they have sex, there's no spark, there's no emotion, there's no feeling, there's nothing. And so it's so tragic to see them just be together. Honestly, out of fear of what may happen if they separate. Because, and I didn't really mention this in the story, but there's a scene where Paul kind of goes out and I guess looks for a prostitute to have sex with. And I'm assuming that he didn't do it. I'm assuming. Either that or he did it and the girl died and now it's back to them. I'm not really sure, but I'm assuming he didn't do it. It doesn't seem like something he'd do. It seemed like he went out there looking for that and then decided like he wasn't going to do it. And it's just crazy to see a relationship like that that's essentially not a relationship. And I think that's, once again, why she chose Greg. Because maybe it did have something deep down to do with the fact that she didn't feel anything for Paul. And maybe she still felt something for Greg. Or maybe it's because deep down she knew that Paul wouldn't be able to have sex with somebody else. Like at the end of the day, he wasn't. So low-key, she was right. If that was her thinking. Like I said, leave a comment down below. But yeah, I just think their relationship is really tragic, and the fact that they end up together out of necessity, she ends up with Paul, who I honestly think is like a nasty pervert. Like throughout the whole movie, he's like flirting with her, even though she's like sobbing and going through really traumatic stuff. He's like flirting with her, and when they go through Jeff's like house, he's like flicking through the porno magazines. Like he's gross. I also want to talk about their friendship dynamic, because I think that's kind of important, because I think that's kind of like another B story that they don't really talk about. So, as we know, the core five initially were Paul, Kelly, Yara, Greg, and Jamie. Now, what it seems like to me is Jamie and Greg are around the same age. And then Paul, Kelly, and Yara are around the same age. So what we know is they were all together at one point, and Greg kind of got older and split off with them, and even kind of sort of started to dislike them for whatever reason, because there's a scene earlier on in the movie where he kind of sees what's going on over there with it's the scene right after Jeff kind of like throws Jamie out on the road and all the police are there, and his girlfriend, or the girl he's with at the time, is like, ugh, something is wrong with them, and he's just like nodding his head in agreement. So at some point he kind of got disillusioned with the friend group, and that happened like way prior to any of this. And then it also seems like Jamie may have unintentionally separated with the friend group, not because she had any issues, but because she just got older and was popular in school, and so she started dating boys and like going out and doing things. And like there's even a scene where Yara says like, your sister's so pretty, like it's disgusting. And Kelly's like, yeah, she is gorgeous. Like they talk about how pretty she is in almost like a negative way. Like, and of course it's like in a joking way where they don't mean it, but I think there's some truth to it, into the fact that they feel as if her being popular and being, with all these boys is kind of what separated her from Yara, Paul, and Kelly. And though they're all like still sort of close, they're not as close as they once were, and that's clear because in the beginning of the movie there were only scenes with Jamie, and then there were scenes with Paul, Kelly, and Yara. Or there was a scene with Jamie and then a scene with Kelly and Yara. Or there was a scene with Jamie and Kelly and then there was Kelly, Yara, and Paul. So it was never the four of them until the scene where they officially decide they're gonna stay at Jamie's house. When that happens, that's when the four gets together. That's when the group gets close again. And they presumably stay close for like the rest of the movie. And then Greg comes in. And Greg, this whole time, once again, he's playing a part of the group, but he doesn't actually believe it. Like, even then, he's being fake with Jamie. Like, after they have sex, and he's telling her, like, how he hasn't seen anything, he's being, like, fake compassionate. Because later on, he meets up with Paul, Yara, and Kelly, and they say, like, oh, she doesn't want to talk right now. And he says, and Paul says, what we saw out there was real. And he was like, oh, well, we'll find out one of these days, won't we? So basically he's saying he thinks she's crazy, but he liked the sex, so it didn't matter. And so I kind of think a part of that, I almost feel like she did that to him. She passed it on to Greg because he didn't believe her. And so she almost wanted to subconsciously like punish him. Be like, oh, bet, you don't believe me? Bet, got you. That's just what I think. But that's it. That is the end of episode 1, talking about It Follows. Please like and subscribe if you liked what I had to say. And leave a comment down below about how you feel about It Follows and anything else I wanted to talk about today. Anyway, I'll see you guys next week. Oh, and by the way, I rated a 7 out of 10. Bye.